So apparently, under the county rules here, you can have a bedroom and a bathroom but no kitchen, or you can have a kitchen and a bedroom but no heating source, or a kitchen and a toilet but no heating source, or not all 3 or 4 of these things at the same time. So the owners of this property had a strategy to provide lodging and then campground spaces and have all of these things, the heat source being, I suppose, there is hot water, but it's in an outbuilding. All of these different stations are outbuildings, so by code, they don't qualify as a dwelling or something, so they don't have to do all the permitting and whatever other legalized bribery, that building these days requires. But then they've got a kitchen. It's just an out stove or camp stove, and then they've got an oven there, and there's a barbecue on the other side. They've got semi-permanent sorts of tents, and then permanent bathroom shower back there. You can sort of see it, with another sink and another outbuilding with laundry. And then they've got a stage for all of your hippie party needs. Lights strung up around, which you can't really see so well now. It looks like a water purification station here coming up, but that's a pretty clever way to get around the local regulations. So you can have these tiny huts which have a bed, but there's no attached bathroom to those that I know of anyway. The kitchen outside is really the crucial part of it. If this place functions as a whole camp, you've got the mess, but they don't have to pay into the tax system for dwellings, and then they didn't have to get all those special permits to build these things. They could just do it unregulated. Pretty clever workaround for the law. When I booked that night at that half corny, half cool place in Airbnb, I expected a yurt. What we got was a tent pad, but nonetheless it felt like a true northern Washington state experience. I'm not sure if the native artwork, like the Seattle Seahawks and other similarly styled fish and birds and things painted on buildings and billboards throughout the region, qualify as appropriation or appreciation, or both, or neither. It probably depends on who you ask. Opinions are like that. Opinions like what's civilized or cultured or smart or something. So Nook and I took off from a little oddball hippie commune there to pick up some groceries at the Safeway or some other shop around town in Port Angeles, where my brother Zach is from. And like a true friend, he met us there just to see us off. He didn't need anything from the grocery store. He'd been working at a local college teaching English as a second language until the pandemic hit, and then his hours were cut and he found himself applying for work in prison, which is ironic for anybody who knows Zach, or it seems so. The prison is one of the few remaining employers in the region, and so not wanting to move because he was taking care of his dad, like a good religious man, he took up work at the prison, which is good quality work anyway. So we headed out past the lakes and channels and sounds, out of the peninsula, past Seattle and Tacoma, across the state. And I had already begun to miss my friend. It's not that Zach and I spent so very much time together, about 1 year in Saudi Arabia, which is really 8 months because it's a school year. But I feel him a kindred spirit, and as if there's some deeper connection between us, considering how and where we met and under what circumstances and things here in Saudi Arabia. But Nook and I had a bit of a schedule to keep, so we set out across the water and into the middle of Washington state, which I had no prior idea was actually some kind of high desert. And that is until we hit the eastern edge of the state, where the landscape changed again into coniferous forests and mountains.
That's snow?
That's snow. Is this your first time seeing snow?
I saw in a,
Jump to you one day.
that's just a, come on. It's not quite. be snow though. I saw a church.
So I had seen snow all my life growing up in Michigan and sleeping in a condemned house and in my car there. But kon tay niไม่
Oh,
ค่อย
still
เห็น
around here?
หิมะสักครั้งหนึ่งในชีวิต No, no, I take that back. อุเมนไซจุงกัวชงตูจุงกัวคันอีเดียน flurry one time แต่ว่าต้องหยุดเล่นกับหิมะหน่อย
We had to walk up or what? Okay.
And so we stopped by the ski hill there in eastern Washington, and Nook got to play with snow, touch snow right up close and personal for the first time, which was fun. I've heard so many people over the years try to tear down all but a few tiny parts of our vast country, calling virtually the entire landmass flyover country, a remark that betrays an ignorance of the natural beauty of the world alongside contempt for the people who live in rural areas, or people not like oneself maybe, or people not like those on television. But the thing about modern cities is that they're basically completely unsustainable. They've done a great job of giving people a false sense of security or order or abundance, but they can only exist as net importers, and all the food comes from those out-of-the-way places where city folks seem to think there's nothing worthwhile. But everybody needs to eat at the end of the day. You can't do a whole lot without the building materials, the raw materials, the fundamental building blocks of life. And to be sure, so much of the United States is really not farmable, nor is there sufficient wildlife to support such expansive human activity as what we see today. Certainly not since the settlers ravaged the herds and forests and pelts and horns and trophies and whatnot. But even before the country was, quote, civilized, seasons changed and herds migrated and trees fruited at different times. And just as we saw flowers opening only in that short period of time on the western coast there. So food security was a constant struggle to find, hence why organized villages and commerce has advantages. Division of labor at its most basic entails providing the bare necessities of survival, food, water, and clothing, roof over one's head. A list of basic needs we can or should now probably expand to include education, transportation, healthcare, communications, technologies, and the like. It must seem so simple to just disregard people who live out in the countryside as rubes or hillbillies or rednecks or something. And clearly these words exist because there are some seriously objectionable ideas and behaviors found in those places. What I'd like people to call drive-through country, at least, rather than flyover those places. But those people who want to keep their natural instinct and brave the rugged landscape to live in or near or around the wild also deserve respect. They make sacrifices like finding a decent job. And certainly with the absence of cellular internet service outside of those hotspot cities and towns, there are families and loving, good people out in the countryside, many of whom did not choose to be born there or grew up there, just like the city folk, and many who can't afford to move, or maybe they just don't want to. And why should they want to live somewhere where city people just call them ignorant just because they don't know how to hunt or fish or till the soil, or because they don't idolize fashion brands or expensive things? Anyway, Idaho gets a bad rap in that way, in my experience, but as we drop down out of Spokane into what I like to call Idaho's chimney, that thin stretch of the state that connects it with Canada, I was taken aback by the astounding beauty of Lake Coeur. Surely many or even all of the parks that we visited on our trip were considered vortices or spirit points or sacred ground long ago by ancient people. And thankfully the states and National Park Services have preserved the pristine wilderness from exploitation, so people like Sangthong and I could enjoy a reasonably priced place to rest our head and make our campfire meals and occasionally have a shower. I'm sure some rich individuals or corporations would gladly buy those protected lands. And clearly the houses and cabins dotted around those breathtaking landscapes were outrageously expensive. So much that the locals have been pushed out of the markets by people from out of state, many of whom are offering cash, like the woman from San Francisco whom we met in Yosemite. She was wearing a hat that said Idaho, And I mentioned that we were headed that way, and she told me that she'd just bought a house up there. A recent trend I'd heard about on podcasts and in the news, prompting me to mention that the local people can't find housing because of all these out-of-staters buying up all the property. And then I mentioned also how the glut of money available to the managerial classes, such that they can pay cash even for their second or third $300,000 to $500,000 house or more expensive. This all suggests income disparities in the country were maybe even more alarming than some people think. Something that she didn't appear to have much to say about, and certainly that's what some of the looting and riots in Portland had been about, not that violence actually solves any problems.
It's beautiful. Quiet and nature. Can hear the water from the lake. You can jump on after.
I'm
about
to jump in the lake, yeah. We'll see.
Yeah.
See how cold it is.
Kẻ ขายาววิ่งนำหน้าไปไกลเลย
By the time we took our morning hike and jog and dipped in the cold Lake Coeur and packed up our tent and headed out to West Yellowstone through Missoula, Montana,
Welcome to Montana. Montana. Montana.
had already developed a fair sense of how musicians on tour could lose track of what city or state they were in, and the classic joke that, you know, the lead singer says, thank you, thank you, the name of one city when they're actually in another city. And as I wondered and marveled and oohed and awed across the giant big blue sky and miles tall puffy cumulus clouds there in Montana, and we looked at the juxtaposition and the contrast of the rolling plains against the backdrop of buttes and mountains, and the bison or buffalo, whatever they're called, whether farmed or not, we certainly felt blessed. We weren't thrilled about the prospects of ever spending less than one night in any one campsite on future trips, but experiencing even fleeting bits and pieces of the bountiful earth surrounding and embracing us, and moving over and through and around it as it did ourselves, we fell deeper in love with America. Every bit her country, every bit Sangthong's country, as it is or can be mine. Passports and visas and political borders aside, the land was ours to experience, on a path that no two people had ever traveled before, nor shall ever travel again.